Have you authored a plugin that provides a task and are wondering how to better test it before releasing it to users? In this video, we will teach you how to add unit tests for the task as well as how to manually test it as an end user would. The CoverageLock task type expects a JaCocoReport XML file to be available to parse the code coverage from. Therefore, projects applying the coverage plugin would need to also apply the JaCoCo plugin and add configuration for measuring code coverage and saving it to an XML file. If we search for the JaCoCo plugin documentation and look at the report configuration, we can see for the JaCoCo test report task, it has a reports block that allows us to configure that an XML report should be either required or not. Reports also have an output location. Let's add the JaCoCo configuration in the plugin consumer project. First, we'll apply the JaCoCo plugin. Then we'll configure the JaCoCo test report task. Which is of type JaCocoReport. We want to configure it to generate an XML file report. For convenience, we'll make it depend on the test task. If we run the JaCoCo test report task, and explore the build folder, we can see the report file over here. We want this file to be passed to the lock coverage gains task as an input. So let's go back to the plugin project. And in the plugin class, instead of specifying the report XML file like this, we want to get the JaCoCo test report task and get the XML report, which is an output produced by this task. If we explore project.task.named, we'll see that it is a task provider. That is, it's a provider of a task. What we want to do is have a file provider. So we will need to transform the task provider, which provides the JaCoCo task, to a file provider, which specifically will provide the XML file report. We can do that using the map function as covered in an earlier chapter. We can get the task that is provided, and on it, we can get the reports, the XML file, and its output location, and we will get that. So now we are transforming this task provider into a file provider, which gives us what we need for this input. Note that you don't want to do something like this, where you get the task instead of calling the map function on it. This will result in an error, since at the time these lines are being processed, which is when the plugin is being applied in a project, the task doesn't exist yet. So this will result in an error. Instead, by using the map function, we can defer getting the task and then the report that it produces. Now that the coverage file is properly passed as an input, the task action will parse it. Let's put a log statement in the action to ensure it's working correctly. Let's build the plugin. And if we go to the consumer project, and let's change the goal to be something smaller, say 55%. And let's run the CoverageLock task. We can see it logs the coverage it got from parsing the file, which is 50% right now. Also, notice that since the task has been configured to use the output of the JaCoCo test report, the output of the JaCoCo test report is going to be an input to this task. The JaCoCo test report task was automatically run as a prerequisite without us having to define it as a prerequisite. Gradle understood that, hey, since I need an output of this task as an input to this task, it is a prerequisite and we need to run it first. We can see a coverage file was produced, which has the 50% value in it. This is still below the goal of 55%. So let's add some code and more tests to get this percentage up. We'll add one more method here, and then we'll add a test for it. Now when we run the CoverageLock task, we'll see that the coverage is now 60% from the XML report file. The plugin task realized that, okay, it's gone up from 50%, which was what was in the coverage file before. Since the goal is 55%, it realized that we don't want to write 60% of the file, we'll cap it at 55, and that's what gets written to the file over here. We've reached the goal of 55% coverage. So far, we have demonstrated how to use the consumer project to manually test the plugin task. Now, let's look at adding unit tests. We can go to the plugin unit tests and add an additional test. We'll test whether the plugin registers the task. We still want to build the project. We want to apply the plugin. And instead of looking for the extension and seeing that it's not null and asserting that it's not null, we'll go ahead and search for the task, find by name, and it's going to be the lock coverage gains. And we want to assert that this is not null. If we run the test right now, we get a failure. You can open the error report and look at the issue. You can also create and view a build scan to gain insights. The scan will immediately point out that the JaCoCo test report task could not be found, which indicates that the JaCoCo plugin has not been applied. Our plugin requires the JaCoCo plugin, which is applied in the consumer project over here. We will also need to do this in the unit test scenario. Now, the JaCoCo plugin also requires at least the Java plugin to be applied. In our consumer project, since we applied the application plugin, that automatically also applies the Java plugin, and we did not have to apply it explicitly. Over here though, since the application plugin is not being applied, we will need to apply the Java plugin. Now when we run the tests, they pass. We can also fetch the task. We'll get the task by name, lock coverage gains, and we will treat it as a CoverageLock task. And we can write some assertions, like we can say assert equals 0.8, which was going to be the expected default goal. And again, we can run the tests, and they still pass. You can write more assertions for other things you want to test. So now we've covered how plugins can provide tasks and how we can test the tasks it provides. Notice that it is still up to the consumer project to apply the JaCoCo plugin and add some configuration, such as requiring the XML file to be produced. In the next chapter, we will cover how you can move this configuration into the plugin itself. That is, have the plugin configure other plugins.